Welcome to the Sleeping Archive, where history comes alive through the voices of those who lived it.
The steam rises from my tea glass like morning mist over the Maritsa River, and I watch it disappear into the stale air of my office. It's November 15th, 1969, and the radiator beneath the window rattles its familiar tune. 3 sharp clanks, then silence. I've grown accustomed to these small sounds, these predictable rhythms that mark my days here at the Plovdiv postal sorting facility. My name is Christo Georgiev. I'm 47 years old, and for the past 8 years, I have been a censor. Not the kind that reviews books or films, though we have those too, but the kind that sits in a windowless room and opens other people's mail. Letters from abroad, packages from relatives in Germany or America, postcards from tourists who don't understand that their innocent words about beautiful Bulgarian mountains might contain coded messages for Western intelligence. At least, that's what we're told to believe. The morning light filters through the single window, illuminating the dust motes that dance above my desk. My desk, if you can call it that. It's more of a table, really, with scratches and coffee stains that tell the stories of censors who came before me. There's a groove near the right corner where someone, perhaps my predecessor, Dmitry Petrov, carved a small cross with his pen. Dmitry left suddenly last spring. No explanation, no farewell party. One day he was here, opening letters from Paris and London, and the next day his chair was empty. I learned not to ask questions about empty chairs. My tools are simple: a silver letter opener that belonged to my father, a bottle of government-issue glue for resealing envelopes, rubber stamps in red and black ink, and a ledger where I record the details of every piece of mail that crosses my desk. Origin, destination, contents, action taken. Sometimes I write approved, sometimes I write destroyed, sometimes, though rarely, I write edited. The radio in the corner crackles to life at precisely 8 o'clock. "Good morning, comrades," announces the familiar voice of Georgy Karaslavov from Radio Sofia. Today marks another step forward in our glorious socialist progress. Yesterday's Central Committee meeting confirmed increased production quotas for our textile factories. I half listen as I arrange the morning's batch of international correspondence. 17 letters today, 3 packages, and a stack of postcards from what appears to be a group of Czech tourists who visited Varna last month. The letters are sorted by origin: Western Europe in one pile, North America in another, and a smaller pile for what we euphemistically call other socialist brotherly nations. These require different levels of scrutiny. The first letter bears a London postmark: Mrs. Elena Todorov addressing her sister in Pazardzhik. I've seen Elena's handwriting before, neat, careful, the script of someone who learned to write in the old days, before the changes. She writes about the weather, about her job at a textile factory in East London, about missing her sister's cooking, harmless enough, but I scan each line for the words that would require intervention. No mention of politics, no criticism of our government, no invitations to visit the West. I stamp it approved and set it aside. The second letter gives me pause. The return address reads, Monsieur Vasilev, Toronto, Canada. The name strikes something familiar in my chest, but I push the feeling aside and focus on the addressee, Stefan Vasilev, formerly of Plovdiv. No current address in Bulgaria. This is what we call a bounced letter, mail for someone who no longer lives at their registered address, or who may have left the country without updating their papers. Protocol dictates that I should stamp it addressee unknown and add it to the pile for destruction. But something about that name, M. Vasilev, won't let me release it so easily. I set it aside and continue with the others. By mid-morning, I've processed 14 of the 17 letters. 2 required minor editing. References to high prices in Bulgaria were crossed out and replaced with more optimistic language about our economic progress. One letter from a Bulgarian émigré in Munich was destroyed entirely after I found what appeared to be coded references to the old church bells and when the roosters stop crowing, phrases that could be innocent nostalgia or something more dangerous. I returned to the letter from Toronto. The envelope is cream-colored, expensive-looking, the kind of paper that suggests the sender has done well for himself abroad. I slide my father's letter opener beneath the flap, feeling the slight resistance as the adhesive gives way. The letter is written in Bulgarian, but in the Latin alphabet rather than Cyrillic, a small rebellion that many émigrés adopt, as if using Western letters somehow makes their words more free. I begin to translate it in my mind as I read. My dear Stefan, I hope this letter finds you well, though I suspect it may never find you at all. I write to the only address I have, the apartment on Kapitan Rachel Street where we used to meet after school to trade cigarettes and dream of adventures beyond the hills of Plovdiv. My breath catches. Kapitan Rachel Street. I know that street, lived 3 blocks from it for most of my childhood, and suddenly I know why the name seemed familiar. Milan Vasilev. We called him Milo. He lived in the apartment building with the red shutters, 2 doors down from the bakery that always smelled of fresh bread and where old Baba Stoika would give us extra rolls when her son wasn't watching. Milo Vasilev, who sat next to me in mathematics class and copied my homework. Milo Vasilev, who dared me to climb the Ottoman clock tower and who was the first among us to kiss a girl, Desislava Petrov, during the feast of Saints Cyril and Methodius when we were 14. Milo Vasilev, who disappeared one night in 1956, leaving only a note for his parents, saying he had gone to find something better. And now, 13 years later, he's writing to Stefan Vasilev, his brother, his younger brother who always tagged along when we went fishing in the Maritsa, who collected bird eggs and knew the names of every tree in the hills around Plovdiv. I should destroy this letter. I should stamp it addressee unknown, and burn it with the others. But instead, I find myself reading on. I think of home every day, Stefan. I think of the way the light looked on the cobblestones in the old town when we walked to school in the morning. I think of Mama's banitsa and the sound of the church bells from Sveta Bogorodica. I think of you, little brother, and wonder if you've grown tall like Papa, if you've found someone to love, if you still collect those bird eggs and know all their names. Life here is not what I expected when I left. Yes, there are opportunities. And yes, I have work, good work, with a construction company that builds those tall glass buildings you see in American movies. But there are long nights when I sit in my apartment in Toronto and listen to the city sounds, horns and sirens, and the constant hum of traffic. And I would trade it all for one more morning walk through the Tsar Simeon Garden, one more cup of coffee at the cafe on Knyaz Alexander Street. The letter continues for 2 more pages. Milo writes about his job, about the Bulgarian Orthodox church he found in Toronto, where he sometimes goes just to hear the familiar hymns. He writes about the other Bulgarians he's met, some who left before the war, some who left after, all carrying their own stories of why they chose exile over staying. But it's the final paragraph that stops my heart. I don't know if you're still at the old address, or if you've moved, or if you've chosen to forget the brother who abandoned you. But if this letter reaches you, Stefan, I want you to know that I'm sorry. Sorry for leaving without explanation. Sorry for the years of silence. Sorry for choosing fear over family. I was young and foolish and believed the stories about what would happen to people like us, people who asked too many questions, who dreamed of different lives. If you can find a way to write back, even if it's dangerous, I would give anything to hear your voice again, even if only through words on paper. My address is at the top of this letter. I check my mailbox every day, hoping. Your brother, Milo. I set the letter down and stare at it for a long moment, feeling the walls of my small office closing in around me. The office suddenly feels smaller, the air thicker. Through the window, I can see the afternoon shoppers walking along the pedestrian street carrying their string bags and stopping to examine the limited selection in the store windows. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that their mail is being read by men like me in rooms like this. The radio continues its afternoon program. A folk song now, one I recognize from my childhood. Something about lovers separated by mountains and time, about messages carried on the wind that never reach their destination. I look at the letter again. According to my records, Stefan Vasilev was last registered at an address on Kapitan Ratio Street in 1961. After that, nothing. No forwarding address, no emigration papers on file, no death certificate. He simply vanished from the official records, the way people sometimes do when they decide that invisibility is safer than visibility. But I know where Stefan is. The revelation sits in my chest like a stone as I lock up the office and walk through the familiar streets of Plovdiv toward home. Evening is settling over the city, and the street lights are beginning to flicker on, casting long shadows between the buildings. The November air carries the smell of coal smoke from the chimneys and the distant aroma of grilled meat from the small restaurants along the main boulevard. I know where Stefan is because I see him twice a week. Every Tuesday and Friday, Stefan Vasilev takes the number 7 tram from the outskirts of the city to the central market, where he works as a bookkeeper for a vegetable cooperative. I know this because the tram number 7 stops directly in front of the postal facility, and I've seen him through my window dozens of times over the years. A thin man with prematurely gray hair, wearing the same brown coat and carrying the same worn leather briefcase. He never looks up at the building where I work, never acknowledges the existence of the censorship office that has been intercepting his brother's letters for over a decade, because Stefan doesn't know that his brother has been trying to reach him. This is the part of my job that they don't explain during the brief training sessions. They tell you about protecting state security, about preventing the infiltration of Western propaganda, about maintaining the purity of socialist ideals. They don't tell you about the weight of knowing things that other people don't know, about carrying secrets that aren't yours to carry. Stefan Vasilev has been living under a different name for 8 years. After the events of 1961, the arrests, the interrogations, the sudden disappearance of several prominent intellectuals, he changed his identity papers and moved to a small apartment on the outskirts of Plovdiv. Officially, he's now Stefan Petrov, named after a grandfather he invented. He works quietly, lives quietly, and has probably convinced himself that his old life, his old name, his old family are safely buried in the past. But his brother has been writing to him for years. I climb the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, my footsteps echoing in the narrow stairwell. Mrs. Dimitrov on the 2nd floor is cooking cabbage rolls. The smell fills the hallway with its familiar comfort. She calls out a greeting as I pass her door, and I respond with the appropriate pleasantries about the weather and the upcoming holiday celebrations. My apartment is small but adequate. 2 rooms, a narrow kitchen, and a balcony that overlooks the courtyard, where the neighborhood children play soccer with a ball made of bundled rags. The walls are decorated with the usual items: a photograph of our party leader, a calendar featuring scenes of socialist progress, a small icon of Saint Dimitri that I keep hidden behind the larger photograph and only look at when I'm sure I'm alone. I pour myself a glass of rakia and sit at the small table by the window. From here, I can see the lights of the old town climbing up the hillside, the illuminated outline of the ancient theater, and beyond that, the dark shapes of the Rhodope Mountains against the evening sky. This is where I was born, where I learned to walk and talk and dream. This is where Milo and Stefan and I spent our childhood summers, exploring the ruins of the Roman Stadium and imagining ourselves as gladiators or emperors or heroes from the old stories. The letter from Toronto sits in my briefcase, which I've placed beside the table. By law, I should have destroyed it hours ago. By protocol, I should have made my note in the ledger, addressee unknown, destroyed, and moved on to the next piece of mail. But instead, I brought it home, and now it seems to pulse with its own presence, like a living thing that demands attention. I think about Stefan, about the man I see twice a week, but have never spoken to. What would happen if I simply walked up to him at the tram stop and said, "Your brother Milo is alive and well in Toronto, and he's been trying to reach you for years"? What would happen if I handed him the letter and walked away? I know what would happen. Stefan would panic. He would wonder how I knew about his old identity, about his brother, about the connection between them. He would wonder if this was a trap, if I was testing his loyalty, if his carefully constructed new life was about to collapse around him. And he would be right to wonder these things, because in our country, information is power, and power is dangerous in the wrong hands. But there's another possibility, one that I've been avoiding thinking about directly, but which keeps creeping into my consciousness like smoke under a door. What if I didn't just deliver the letter? What if I did something more dangerous, something that violates every principle of my position and every rule of the system I serve? What if I wrote back? The idea is absurd, of course, impossible. I am a censor, not a courier. My job is to protect the state from dangerous communications, not to facilitate them. If I were caught writing to foreign nationals under false pretenses, if I were discovered impersonating a Bulgarian citizen in correspondence with émigrés, the consequences would be severe. Not just dismissal from my job, but arrest, interrogation, years in prison, or worse. And yet, as I sit here drinking rakia and watching the lights of Plovdiv twinkle in the darkness, I can't shake the image of Milo sitting in his apartment in Toronto, checking his mailbox every day, hoping for a letter that will never come. I can't forget the words he wrote. "I would give anything to hear your voice again, even if only through words on paper." The radio in the corner provides the evening programming, news of agricultural successes, reports of increased industrial production, a brief weather forecast predicting snow in the mountains. Between the official announcements, they play music, Bulgarian folk songs, Russian classical pieces, and occasionally something from the West that has been deemed acceptable for public consumption. Tonight, they're playing a song I don't recognize, something slow and melancholy with strings and what sounds like a saxophone. I finish my rakia and pour another glass. Through the thin walls, I can hear the Dimitrov family's evening routine, the sound of dishes being washed, children being called to bed, the television playing the nightly news broadcast. Normal sounds of normal people living normal lives, untroubled by the moral complexities of censorship and correspondence and the weight of other people's secrets. But I am not a normal person living a normal life. I am a man who reads other people's mail for a living, who stamps letters, approved or destroyed based on criteria that even I don't fully understand, who carries the stories of dozens of families separated by borders and politics and fear. And tonight, I am a man who is considering committing what could be interpreted as treason. I retrieve the letter from my briefcase and read it again, this time more slowly. Milo's handwriting is neat but hurried, as if he wrote it in one sitting without pausing to consider the risks. He mentions specific places: the cafe on Knyaz Alexander Street, the Tsar Simeon Garden, the church of Sveta Bogoroditsa. Details that only someone who truly grew up in Plovdiv would know, details that prove his authenticity but also make his words more dangerous. Because nostalgia, I've learned, is a form of resistance. When people write lovingly about the old days, when they remember the taste of bread that doesn't exist anymore or the sound of church bells that have been silenced, they're creating an alternative narrative to the official one. They're suggesting that perhaps the past was not as terrible as we're told, that perhaps the changes we've experienced are not entirely improvements. And yet, reading Milo's letter, I don't sense any political agenda. I sense only longing. The deep, aching longing of a man who made a choice 13 years ago and has been living with the consequences ever since. A man who gave up his family, his language, his homeland, in exchange for the possibility of freedom, and who has discovered that freedom without connection is just another form of imprisonment. I think about my own choices, about how I ended up in this job, in this life, in this small apartment reading other people's forbidden correspondence. After the war, when I was young and needed work, a position in the postal service seemed like a reasonable option, safe, bureaucratic, unlikely to involve me in anything complicated or dangerous. But as the years passed and the political climate shifted, my role evolved. First, I was simply sorting mail. Then I was checking for damaged packages. Then I was looking for contraband items. And finally, almost without noticing the transition, I became a censor. Each step seemed small, reasonable, justified by the circumstances of the time. But the accumulation of these small steps has led me to a place I never intended to be, a place where I hold the power to connect or separate families, to deliver hope or destroy it, to bridge distances or make them insurmountable. The clock on the wall shows nearly midnight. Tomorrow I will return to the office, and there will be new letters to process, new decisions to make, new secrets to carry. But tonight, I'm going to do something I have never done before. Tonight, I am going to make a copy of Milo's letter. He sold it to me for half its value, desperate to convert his possessions into cash before his departure. At the time, I told myself I bought it for practical reasons, to type reports for work, to write official correspondence with greater efficiency than my handwriting allowed. But the truth is, I bought it because I had always dreamed of being a writer. Not a great writer necessarily, but someone who could capture the small stories of ordinary people, the quiet dramas that unfold in places like Plovdiv, among people like the ones I see every day on the trams and in the markets. I imagined writing stories about the old woman who sells flowers outside the post office, about the young couple who meet every Thursday at the cafe on Tsar Boris Street, about the children who play in the ruins of the Roman theater and pretend they're archaeologists discovering ancient treasures. Of course, I never became a writer. The political climate made such ambitions seem frivolous at best, dangerous at worst. Better to keep one's imagination private, to express creativity through safer channels, perhaps joining the workplace choir or volunteering to help design propaganda posters for the local party office. But I kept the typewriter, and sometimes, late at night, I would practice typing passages from approved books, just to hear the familiar rhythm of the keys, to feel the satisfaction of words appearing on paper through the mechanical magic of metal and ink. Tonight, I remove the cloth cover and thread a piece of carbon paper between two sheets of typing paper. My hands are trembling slightly. From the rakia, I tell myself, though I know it's more than that. What I'm about to do crosses a line that I can never uncross. Once I make this copy, once I commit Milo's words to paper in my own typewriter, I become complicit in his correspondence. I become part of the network of connection that I'm supposed to be preventing. I place Milo's original letter beside the typewriter and begin to copy it, word for word, in Bulgarian Cyrillic. The sound of the keys seems impossibly loud in the quiet apartment, and I pause frequently to listen for sounds from the neighboring units. But the building is asleep, and the only sounds are the distant rumble of a late tram and the whisper of wind through the bare branches outside my window. As I type, I find myself adding small details, embellishments that aren't in the original but which feel true to the spirit of what Milo is trying to say. When he mentions the cafe on Knyaz Alexander Street, I add a reference to old Georgie, who used to serve coffee in glasses with silver holders and who knew everyone's order by heart. When he writes about missing the church bells, I specify that he must mean the bells of Sveta Bogoroditsa, which had a particular tone, deeper than the bells of the other churches, with a resonance that could be heard all the way to the hills on quiet Sunday mornings. These are not lies, exactly. They are the kinds of details that someone who truly grew up in Plovdiv would remember, the kinds of specific memories that would make the letter more convincing if it were ever examined. But as I add them, I realize that I'm not just copying Milo's letter, I'm improving it, making it more authentic than the original, and in doing so, I'm becoming a writer after all. The work takes me nearly 2 hours. My typing is slow and careful, and I make several mistakes that require me to start over with fresh paper. But eventually, I have 2 copies of the letter, one that reproduces Milo's words exactly, and one that incorporates my additions and corrections. The carbon copy is fainter but still legible, and I place it in an envelope addressed to myself, using my home address rather than the office. The improved version, I realize, could serve a different purpose. Stefan Vasilev, Stefan Petrov, as he now calls himself, deserves to know that his brother is alive and thinking of him. But he also deserves to receive a letter that won't immediately arouse suspicion if it's intercepted by censors. The original letter, with its nostalgic references and its admission of illegal emigration, would be flagged immediately. But a carefully edited version, one that emphasizes family connection rather than political dissatisfaction, might have a chance of reaching its destination. I spent another hour creating this third version. In this iteration, Milo becomes a visiting professor at the University of Toronto, someone who left Bulgaria legally for academic purposes and who maintains proper respect for his homeland. His nostalgia becomes patriotic rather than subversive. His longing for connection expressed in ways that celebrate Bulgarian culture rather than criticizing Bulgarian politics. The church bells become symbols of national heritage rather than mourning for silenced traditions. The memories of childhood become expressions of love for Bulgarian customs rather than implied criticism of current conditions. The plea for correspondence becomes a natural desire for family communication rather than a dangerous request for forbidden connection. When I finish, I have created what I believe is a masterpiece of political editing, a letter that preserves the emotional core of Milo's message while packaging it in language that might survive official scrutiny. It's still risky, of course. Any letter from abroad is scrutinized, and any letter to someone who has changed their identity would raise additional questions. But it's possible that this version might make it through. The question is whether I have the courage to send it. I make coffee and sit at the kitchen table as dawn begins to lighten the sky outside. The three versions of the letter are spread before me like different paths through a forest. The original, which I should destroy, the exact copy, which serves as evidence of my transgression, and the edited version, which represents my transformation from censor to facilitator. Through the window, I can see the early morning workers beginning their commute, men in dark coats walking quickly toward the tram stops, women carrying shopping bags to the market before the best items are sold, children bundling up for the walk to school. Plovdiv is waking up to another day of ordinary life, unaware that in this small apartment, a postal censor is contemplating an act of rebellion. The radio offers its morning greetings and the day's weather forecast. Clear skies, cold temperatures, light winds from the northwest. A good day for walking, for thinking, for making decisions that could change everything. I fold the edited letter and place it in a clean envelope, addressing it to Stefan Petrov at his current address on the outskirts of the city. No return address, no identifying marks, just a letter that could have been sent by anyone, that could have originated from anywhere, that carries no evidence of its true authorship, except the knowledge that sits in my chest like a secret burning. But sending the letter is only half of the transgression I'm contemplating. The other half is even more dangerous, even more impossible to justify or explain. I want to write back to Milo, not as Christo Georgiev, postal censor and guardian of state security, but as Stefan Vasilev, the brother who disappeared into anonymity rather than face the consequences of political association. I want to tell Milo that Stefan received his letter, that Stefan forgives him for leaving, that Stefan understands the choice he made and the price he's paid for it. I want to give Milo the reunion he's been hoping for, even if it has to be a fictional one. The idea is insane, of course. Impersonating another person in international correspondence is not just a violation of my professional ethics, it's a serious crime. And yet, as I sit here in the grey morning light, surrounded by the evidence of my night's work, I find myself composing the first lines of Stefan's response in my mind. My dear brother Milo, your letter found me, though perhaps not in the way you expected. I am alive, I am well, and I have never stopped thinking of you. 3 days pass before I find the courage to begin Stefan's reply. 3 days of watching him board the number 7 tram, of observing his careful movements and quiet demeanor, of studying his face for clues about the man he's become since he disappeared from his old life. 3 days of carrying Milo's letter in my briefcase, reading it again and again, memorizing not just the words but the rhythm of the language, the particular way that longing expresses itself in sentences. On the 4th day, I call in sick to work. It's not entirely a lie. I do feel unwell, sick with the weight of what I'm planning, nauseated by the risks I'm taking, feverish with the excitement of crossing boundaries I never imagined I would cross. I tell my supervisor, Viktor Petrov, no relation to the Stefan Petrov who is really Stefan Vasilev, that I have a stomach ailment and need a day to recover. He responds with the usual bureaucratic concern about meeting our processing quotas, but grants me the absence. The morning is cold and clear, and I walk through the old town instead of taking the tram to work. The cobblestone streets are nearly empty at this hour, and my footsteps echo between the buildings like a conversation with history. I pass the cafe where Milo and Stefan and I used to drink coffee and argue about football scores, the bookstore where we browsed the approved selections and whispered about the books we'd heard about but never seen, the small park where we met girls and planned our futures. Everything looks smaller than I remember, more worn, marked by the years that have passed since our childhood ended and adult life began. The cafe has different owners now, and the bookstore displays mostly technical manuals and political treatises. The park is the same, but the trees are taller, and the benches where we used to sit are weathered and cracked. I walk to the address where Stefan used to live, the apartment building on Kapitan Rachel Street that Milo mentioned in his letter. It's a 3-story building with peeling yellow paint and narrow windows that look out onto the street like tired eyes. The bakery that used to be 2 doors down is now a small shop selling household goods, and there's no sign of Baba Stoika or her son or the smell of fresh bread that I remember from our childhood. But the building itself is still there, still occupied, still part of the ongoing life of the city. I stand across the street for a few minutes, imagining a young Stefan Vasilev running down those stairs, meeting his friends for school, carrying books and dreams and the casual confidence of someone who doesn't yet know how complicated life can become. When I return to my apartment, I sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a blank piece of paper. No typewriter this time. This letter needs to be handwritten in the kind of script that someone like Stefan might use. I've been practicing his signature, based on documents I've seen in the office files, and I think I can approximate his handwriting style. Not perfectly, but well enough to satisfy someone who hasn't seen the real Stefan's writing in 13 years. The hardest part is finding the right voice. Stefan would be older now, marked by years of living under an assumed identity, shaped by whatever experiences led him to change his name and disappear from official records. He would be cautious, probably suspicious of any contact that might threaten his carefully constructed anonymity, but he would also be hungry for connection, especially connection to the brother he lost when he chose safety over family. I begin to write, "My dear Milo, I don't know how your letter found me, but I'm grateful that it did. It's been 13 years since I heard your name spoken aloud, 13 years since I allowed myself to think about the brother who left one night without saying goodbye. I won't lie to you. I was angry for a long time. Angry that you left me to deal with the questions, the suspicions, the assumption that if one brother was unreliable, the other might be as well. After you disappeared, I found myself watched, questioned, passed over for opportunities that might have been mine under different circumstances. But I understand now what I couldn't understand then. You were protecting us both. If you had stayed, if you had been caught, if you had been arrested for whatever activities or associations led you to flee, I would have been implicated as well. Your absence saved me from that fate, even though it cost us both more than we could have imagined. I pause, reading what I've written. It sounds right, I think. The mixture of hurt and forgiveness, the acknowledgement of political realities, the tone of someone who has learned to navigate dangerous waters. but I need to be careful not to reveal details that might compromise Stefan's current situation, while still providing enough information to satisfy Milo's hunger for connection. I've built a quiet life here, different from what we planned when we were young, but safe and sustainable. I work with numbers, which you'll remember was always my strength. I live simply, read when I can, and try to stay connected to the places and people that matter while avoiding the kind of attention that makes life complicated. You asked about the old places, and I can tell you that some things change while others remain. The clock tower still chimes the hours, though they've added a red star to the top. The Maritsa River still flows past the city, and in the spring, the hills are still covered with the same wildflowers we used to pick for Mama. The Roman theatre hosts performances sometimes, though they tend to be more educational than entertaining. I think of you often, especially when I pass the places we used to go. Last week, I walked by what used to be Baba Stoika's bakery, and for a moment I could almost smell the bread and hear your voice daring me to steal an extra roll. These memories are precious to me now in ways they never were when we were making them. This is the delicate part, providing enough personal detail to convince Milo that this is really Stefan, while avoiding specifics that might reveal my true identity or location. I decide to focus on shared memories rather than current circumstances, nostalgia rather than contemporary reality. Do you remember the summer when we decided to build a boat and sail down the Maritsa all the way to the Danube? We spent weeks collecting wood and rope, convinced that we were going to be great explorers, discoverers of new lands beyond the horizon. The boat barely held together long enough to cross the shallow water near the old bridge. But we were so proud of our construction that we spent the entire afternoon pretending we had reached the Black Sea and were preparing to sail to Constantinople. I think about that boat sometimes, how confident we were in our engineering, how certain we were that our ambitions were limited only by our imagination. Maybe we were right, in a way. Maybe the only thing that changed was our understanding of which adventures are possible and which ones are too dangerous to attempt. The letter is becoming longer than I intended, but I find myself reluctant to stop. Writing in Stefan's voice feels like channeling something I had forgotten about friendship, about family, about the connections that define us even when they're interrupted by distance and time and political circumstances. You wrote about Toronto, about the glass buildings in the Bulgarian church where you sometimes go to hear familiar hymns. I'm glad you found that place, Milo. It's important to have somewhere that feels like home, even when you're far from the place where you were born. I hope your work is satisfying, and I hope you found people who appreciate the qualities that made you special when we were young. Your curiosity, your courage, your willingness to take risks that more careful people like me could never take. Those qualities came with a price, but they also took you places I could never go. I want you to know that I don't regret staying, just as I hope you don't regret leaving. We made different choices based on different fears and different dreams, and both of our lives have meaning and value, even if they're not the lives we planned when we were building boats and exploring ruins and believing that the future was something we could construct with our own hands. I'm approaching the end of the letter, and I need to address the question of future correspondence. This is the most dangerous part. How to maintain contact without creating a trail that could be traced back to either Stefan or to me. As for writing again, I need to be careful. You understand the situation here, the reasons why some communications are monitored, why some connections are considered risky. But if you write to me again, address the letter to Stefan Petrov at Postbox 247, Plovdiv Central. I check that box when I can, and it's safer than using a home address. Don't expect immediate responses. Sometimes it takes time to find the right moment, the right words, the right balance between honesty and safety. But know that every letter you send will be treasured, will be read and reread, will be a bridge across the distance that separates us. I love you, brother. I have always loved you, even when I was angry, even when I was hurt, even when I convinced myself that it was easier to forget than to remember. You are part of me, part of the person I was, and the person I've become, And nothing, not time, not distance, not politics, not fear, can change that. Until we meet again, in this world or the next. Your brother Stefan. I set down the pen and read the letter through twice. It feels authentic to me, the voice of someone who has learned to navigate between truth and safety, who has found ways to express love while acknowledging the constraints of circumstance. More importantly, it feels like the kind of letter that might heal the wound that Milo has been carrying for 13 years, the wound of abandonment and separation and unanswered questions. But as I fold the letter and place it in an envelope addressed to Mr. Vasilev in Toronto, I'm struck by the full weight of what I've done. I haven't just violated my professional responsibilities or transgressed against state security. I've created a fictional relationship, a false connection based on impersonation and deception. Even if my motives are compassionate, even if the result brings comfort to a lonely émigré, the means I've used are fundamentally dishonest. And yet, as I seal the envelope and prepare to mail it, I don't feel like a criminal. I feel like a writer who has finally found his story. Winter settles over Plovdiv like a familiar blanket, bringing with it the smells of coal smoke and the sound of boots on cobblestones covered with frost. The number 7 tram runs less frequently now, and I notice that Stefan Petrov, as I've learned to think of him, has taken to wearing a thick scarf that covers the lower half of his face. From my office window, I can see only his eyes as he waits at the tram stop, but they seem more alert lately, more watchful, as if he's expecting something or someone. I wonder if he received the edited version of Milo's letter that I sent to his home address. I wonder if he's puzzled by it, suspicious of it, or if he's simply grateful for any connection to his past, even a sanitized one. But I'll never know because Stefan Petrov and Christo Georgiev exist in parallel worlds that can never officially intersect. However, Stefan Vasilev and Milo Vasilev have begun a correspondence that is flourishing beyond my wildest expectations. Milo's response to Stefan's letter arrived 3 weeks after I sent mine. It came through the regular channels, addressed to the post box I had specified, and it passed through my hands as part of the normal censorship process. Reading a letter addressed to a fictional version of myself, written by someone who believes he's communicating with his long-lost brother, created a strange sensation of vertigo, as if I were looking into a mirror that reflected not my face, but my soul. My dear Stefan, Milo had written, I cannot describe the joy I felt when I opened your letter. For 13 years, I have been composing responses to letters I imagined you might send, and now that I finally have your words in front of me, I find myself speechless with gratitude. You are right that we made different choices based on different fears. I have spent so many nights wondering if I was a coward for leaving, or if staying would have been the greater cowardice. Your letter helps me understand that perhaps there was no right choice, only different paths through the same difficult terrain. I want to tell you about my life here, about the ways I've tried to maintain our father's dignity and our mother's kindness, even in this strange new world. I work with good people, honest people, who remind me of the values we learned at home. There's a man named Georgie, not our old neighbor Georgie, but a Georgie nonetheless, who emigrated from Yambol in 1958. He tells stories about his village that sound like stories from our childhood, and sometimes we sit in his kitchen drinking tea and pretending we're back in Bulgaria, complaining about the weather and arguing about football scores. The letter continued for several pages, filled with details about Milo's life in Toronto, his work, his small apartment, his gradual adaptation to Canadian customs and Canadian winters. But it was the final paragraph that moved me most. Stefan, I want you to know that writing to you and receiving your response has changed something fundamental in my relationship with my own life. For years, I felt like I was living someone else's story, playing a role in a drama I didn't understand. But now I feel like myself again, like the brother you remember, like the son our parents raised, like the young man who dreamed of adventures beyond the hills of Plovdiv. Please write again soon. These letters are becoming the most important part of my weeks, the thing I look forward to most in a life that has often felt like it was missing its center. And so I wrote again, and Milo responded, and gradually we established a rhythm of correspondence that has continued for months. Every 4 to 6 weeks, a letter arrives from Toronto addressed to Stefan Petrov at Postbox 247. I process it through the censorship office, make my notes in the official ledger, and then take it home to read and respond to in the privacy of my apartment. The letters have evolved over time, becoming more intimate, more detailed, more trusting. Milo writes about his dreams, not just his sleeping dreams, but his hopes for the future, his plans for eventually returning to Bulgaria when political conditions improve, his desire to introduce me to the life he's built in Canada. I respond as Stefan, sharing carefully constructed stories about my own life, my work, my quiet contentment with a simple existence. Some of these stories are based on my own experiences, filtered through the lens of what Stefan's life might have been like. Others are complete fiction, invented details designed to satisfy Milo's curiosity while maintaining the consistency of the character I've created. I've become quite skilled at this kind of narrative construction, weaving together truth and imagination in ways that feel authentic and satisfying, but the correspondence has also created unexpected complications. 3 months ago, Milo began asking more specific questions about our mutual acquaintances, about people we knew in childhood, about relatives and neighbors and classmates. Some of these I can answer based on my own memories. After all, I grew up in the same city, attended the same schools, knew many of the same people, but others require research, careful investigation into the current circumstances of people I haven't thought about in years. I've become a detective of ordinary life, tracking down information about former neighbors, childhood friends, distant relatives. I've learned that Desislava Petrov, the girl Milo kissed during the feast of Saints Cyril and Methodius, married a textile worker and moved to Sofia, where she has 3 children and works as a nurse. I've discovered that old Georgie from the cafe died in 1965, and that the cafe is now run by his nephew, who serves coffee in modern cups rather than glasses with silver holders. This information gathering has required me to be more social than usual, to engage in conversations with colleagues and neighbors, to ask casual questions about people and places and events. I've had to become the kind of person who shows interest in local gossip, who remembers names and relationships, who maintains connections to the broader social network of the city. In some ways, this has improved my life. I feel more connected to Plovdiv, more aware of its ongoing story, more invested in the small dramas and celebrations that make up the daily life of the community. But it has also made me more visible, more noticeable, more likely to attract attention from people who might wonder why a postal censor has suddenly developed an intense interest in the personal histories of local residents. Last week, my supervisor, Viktor Petrov, asked me about my research activities. "I've heard you've been asking questions about various citizens," he said during our monthly review meeting. "Is this related to your censorship work? Are you investigating potential security issues?" I had prepared for this question, and I responded with a carefully crafted explanation about the importance of understanding local social networks in order to better evaluate potentially suspicious correspondence. "When I know more about the people involved," I said, "I can better assess whether their communications represent genuine family connections or possible security threats." Victor seemed satisfied with this explanation, but I could see that he was filing the information away for future reference. In our system, even innocent activities can become suspicious if they're noticed by the wrong people at the wrong time. The most dangerous moment came last month, when Milo's letter included a photograph. It was a recent picture of himself standing in front of what appeared to be a government building in Toronto, wearing a dark coat and smiling at the camera. On the back, he had written, "For Stefan, so you can see how your brother has aged. Please send me a recent photograph of yourself, so I can remember what you look like now." The request was natural, expected, the kind of thing that brothers separated by distance and time would want to share. but it was also impossible for me to fulfill. I could not send Milo a photograph of Stefan Petrov because that would require me to either locate the real Stefan and somehow obtain his photograph without his knowledge, or to send a photograph of myself, which would create evidence of my impersonation that could be discovered at any time. I spent days considering how to respond to this request. I considered various excuses: lost camera, damaged photographs, reluctance to be seen in pictures for security reasons. But eventually I settled on a response that I thought captured the right balance of longing and caution. "Dear Milo," I wrote, "your photograph moved me to tears. You look so much like Papa did when he was your age, and seeing your face after all these years reminded me of everything I've missed, everything I've lost, everything I still hope for. I wish I could send you a recent photograph of myself, but I've become a very private person over the years. The circumstances of my life require a certain invisibility, a certain distance from documentation that might be used to track my movements or activities. I hope you understand that this is not about shame or reluctance to be seen by you, but about the practical realities of living safely in a world where information can be dangerous. Instead, let me paint you a picture with words. I am grayer now, thinner than I was in our youth, marked by years of careful living and quiet work. But I still have our mother's eyes, and I still carry myself with the posture that Papa taught us. Straight back, steady gait, chin up, even when the world seems uncertain. When you look in the mirror, Milo, you are seeing what I would look like with the confidence that comes from living freely. When I imagine my own reflection, I see what you would look like with the caution that comes from living carefully. We are still brothers, still recognizable to each other, still connected by the bond that was forged in childhood and strengthened by separation." The response seemed to satisfy Milo, but it also marked a new level of complexity in our correspondence. Each letter now requires more careful construction, more attention to detail, more consideration of the implications of every sentence and phrase. I am no longer simply facilitating a connection between separated brothers. I am actively creating and maintaining a fictional relationship that has become central to both of our lives. Because the truth is, these letters have become central to my life as well. The twice-monthly correspondence with Milo has given me a purpose beyond the mechanical processing of other people's mail. It has made me feel like I'm participating in something meaningful, something that matters, something that contributes to human happiness rather than simply preventing human connection. But it has also made me aware of how lonely my own life has become, how much I've sacrificed in the name of safety and stability and professional responsibility. Reading Milo's letters, responding as Stefan, has awakened parts of myself that I had forgotten existed, the parts that once dreamed of adventure, that valued connection over security, that believed in the possibility of authentic relationships in an inauthentic world. And that awakening has led me to make an even more dangerous decision. Spring arrives early this year, and with it comes a letter from Milo that changes everything. The envelope is thicker than usual, and when I open it in the privacy of my office, I discover that it contains not just a letter, but also a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. The letter explains, "My dear Stefan, I am writing to you with news that will either fill you with joy or terrify you with its implications. After 15 years in Toronto, I have decided to return to Bulgaria. Not permanently perhaps, but for an extended visit. I have saved enough money to make the journey, and I have obtained the necessary documentation through the Bulgarian consulate here. I will arrive in Sofia on June 15th, and I plan to take the train to Plovdiv the following day. I want to see our city again, to walk the streets where we grew up, to visit the places that have lived in my memory for so many years. But most importantly, I want to see you. I know this visit carries risks for both of us. I know that my return might attract attention from authorities who prefer that émigrés remain abroad. I know that our reunion might create complications for the quiet life you've built. But Stefan, I am 45 years old, and I cannot bear the thought of dying without seeing my brother again, without embracing you, without speaking the words that can only be spoken face to face. The package I've enclosed contains a small gift, a watch that belonged to our grandfather, the one Papa gave me when I turned 18. I carried it with me when I left Bulgaria, and I've worn it every day since. Now, I want you to have it, whether we manage to meet during my visit or not. It's a way of returning part of our family's history to its proper place. I will be staying at the Hotel Tremontium in Plovdiv from June 16th to June 30th. If you feel it's safe to meet, you can leave a message for me there. If you decide that a meeting is too dangerous, I will understand, but I hope you'll consider the possibility that some risks are worth taking for the sake of love. Your brother, Milo. I unwrapped the small package with trembling fingers. Inside is indeed a pocket watch, gold-plated and elegant, with Cyrillic numerals and an inscription on the back. To Stefan, with love from Grandfather Vasilev, 1923. It's a beautiful object, clearly cherished, clearly significant, the kind of family heirloom that carries stories across generations, that connects past to present through the simple act of marking time. But it's also evidence of my deception. If this watch truly belonged to the Vasilev family, if it was truly given to Milo by their grandfather, then my possession of it proves that I am not who I've claimed to be in our correspondence. The watch is a test, perhaps unconscious on Milo's part, but a test nonetheless. I spend the rest of the day in a state of barely controlled panic. Every letter I process, every stamp I apply, every note I make in my ledger feels mechanical, automatic, performed by some distant version of myself while my real consciousness grapples with the impossible situation I've created. The options are limited, and none of them are acceptable. I could simply disappear Stefan from Milo's life, stop responding to letters, abandon the postbox, let the correspondence die a natural death. Milo would be disappointed, perhaps hurt, but he would eventually accept that his brother doesn't want contact. He would complete his visit to Bulgaria, return to Toronto, and resume his life with the knowledge that he tried to reconnect, but failed. But this option feels like a betrayal of everything I've built, everything I've invested in this relationship. For months, I've been Stefan's voice, Stefan's heart, Stefan's presence in Milo's life. I've shared his joys and sorrows, celebrated his successes, offered comfort during his moments of doubt. To simply vanish now would be to murder the character I've created, to abandon someone who has come to depend on me for emotional sustenance. I could confess the truth, write a letter to Milo explaining who I really am, how I came to intercept his correspondence, why I chose to respond rather than destroy it, admit that I am not Stefan, that Stefan may not even know of Milo's attempts to contact him, that our entire relationship has been built on impersonation and deception, but this option would likely result in disaster for everyone involved. Milo would feel betrayed, manipulated, made a fool of by someone he trusted with his deepest feelings. The authorities would investigate how a postal censor came to be conducting unauthorized correspondence with foreign nationals. My job would end, my freedom would be threatened, and the real Stefan, wherever he is, whatever life he's built, might be drawn into a scandal that could destroy the anonymity he's worked so hard to maintain. The third option is the most dangerous, but also the most appealing to the part of me that has come to live for these letters, that has found meaning and purpose in this fictional relationship. I could arrange for Milo to meet Stefan, not the real Stefan. That would be impossible to orchestrate without his knowledge and consent. But a Stefan, someone who could convincingly play the role of the long-lost brother, who could provide the reunion that Milo has been dreaming of, who could transform fiction into reality through the alchemy of performance. The idea is absurd, of course. I am not an actor, not a confidence man, not someone capable of sustaining such an elaborate deception in person. The differences between writing letters in another person's voice and actually embodying that person are enormous. Milo would see through the impersonation immediately, would recognize that something was wrong, would demand explanations I couldn't provide. There is, however, a fourth option, one that I've been avoiding thinking about directly, but which has been lurking at the edges of my consciousness since I first read Milo's letter. I could find the real Stefan and tell him the truth. Not the truth about my impersonation. That would be too dangerous, too complicated, too likely to result in disaster. But a simpler truth, that his brother has been trying to reach him, that Milo is returning to Bulgaria, that there's an opportunity for genuine reunion if Stefan is willing to take the risk. This option would require me to abandon my fictional relationship with Milo, to step back from the role I've been playing and return to being simply Christo Georgiev, postal censor. But it would also offer the possibility of facilitating a real reunion between real brothers, of transforming my months of deception into something genuinely meaningful and valuable. The question is whether I have the courage to sacrifice my own connection to this story in order to make the story itself come true. Over the next week, I watch Stefan more carefully than ever before. I note the way he stands while waiting for the tram, slightly favoring his left leg, hands clasped behind his back. I observe his interactions with other passengers, polite but minimal, maintaining the kind of social distance that suggests someone who has learned to be cautious about drawing attention. I study his face, looking for traces of the young man I remember, for signs of the brother that Milo has been writing to. And gradually, I begin to see the family resemblance. Not physical. Stefan is thinner than Milo, grayer, more worn by his years of careful living. But there's something in his eyes, something in the way he holds his head that echoes the photographs Milo has sent, that suggests the shared genetics and shared history that define brothers. The radio in my office crackles with the evening news. Leonid Brezhnev has given another speech about socialist solidarity. Production quotas have been exceeded at the Maritsa East Mining Complex. The weather forecast predicts rain for the weekend, which will be good for the spring crops, but bad for the May Day preparations in the central square. I barely listen. My attention is consumed by the moral calculus I've been performing for days now, weighing the risks and benefits of each possible course of action. The correspondence with Milo has given my life a meaning it never had before, but it has also created obligations I'm not sure I can fulfill. That evening, I walk through the old town instead of taking my usual route home. The cobblestone streets are wet from an afternoon shower, and they reflect the glow of the street lamps like fragments of captured light. I pass the cafe where we used to meet after school. Now it's a state-run restaurant serving standardized portions of shopska salad and grilled meat. The bookstore where we browsed forbidden Western novels has become a shop selling technical manuals and approved literature, but the fountain in the central square still flows, and the clock tower still chimes the hours, and the hills that surround our city still catch the last light of evening in the same way they did when we were children, dreaming of adventures beyond the horizon. I find myself standing outside the building where Stefan used to live, the apartment on Capitan Recho Street that Milo mentioned in his first letter. The yellow paint has faded to an uncertain beige, and several windows are boarded up, but the building endures. A woman emerges from the entrance carrying a shopping bag, and she nods politely as she passes. Normal life continuing in the spaces where other lives used to unfold. On Friday, June 8th, exactly 1 week before Milo's scheduled arrival in Sofia, I make my decision. I wait at the tram stop where Stefan always boards the number 7. When he approaches, I step forward and speak his name, not Stefan Petrov, but his real name, the name he hasn't heard spoken aloud in years. Stefan Vasilev, I say quietly. I need to speak with you about your brother Milo. The effect is immediate and dramatic. Stefan's face goes pale, his hands begin to tremble, and for a moment I think he might faint or run or cry out. But instead he looks around quickly to make sure no one else has heard, then nods once and says, "Not here. Follow me." He leads me away from the tram stop, through a series of narrow streets and alleys, until we reach a small cafe in a part of the city I don't know well. It's one of the new places, modern tables, fluorescent lighting, the kind of establishment that caters to young people and tourists rather than locals who remember how things used to be. We sit at a corner table, and Stefan orders coffee for both of us while I try to find the words to begin. His hands are still shaking slightly as he lights a cigarette, a habit I don't remember him having as a young man. "How do you know my name?" he asks finally. "How do you know about Milo?" I take a deep breath and begin to tell him a version of the truth. I explain that I work for the postal service, that I've been intercepting letters from his brother, that Milo has been trying to reach him for years. I don't mention my responses, my impersonation, the fictional relationship I've constructed. I simply present myself as a postal worker who has chosen to facilitate family reunion rather than prevent it. Stefan listens without interruption, his coffee growing cold in his hands. When I finish, he sits in silence for a long time, staring out the window at the people passing by on the street. Young couples walking hand in hand, older women carrying shopping bags, children chasing each other between the parked cars. "He's really coming back?" he asks finally. "June 15th. He'll be in Plovdiv on the 16th, staying at the Hotel Tremontium. After all these years. He wants to see you, Stefan. He's been writing letters, hoping for contact, dreaming of reunion. This is your chance." Stefan looks at me directly for the first time since we sat down. "And what do you get out of this? Why would you risk your job, your position, to help reunite two brothers you barely know?" It's a fair question, and one I've been asking myself. Why have I done this? Why have I invested so much time and energy and risk in a story that isn't really mine? Because, I say slowly, sometimes the most important thing you can do is help other people find each other. Sometimes that's worth the risk. Stefan nods, as if this explanation makes sense to him. He stubs out his cigarette in the glass ashtray between us, and I notice that his fingers are stained yellow from years of smoking. Another change that time has brought to the boy I once knew. "I've spent 8 years being Stefan Petrov," he says quietly. 8 years pretending that Stefan Vasilev never existed, that his family was just a memory that belonged to someone else. It's been safer that way, but it's also been like living with part of myself amputated. He pauses, looking down at his hands. There were nights when I dreamed about Milo, about what happened to him after he left. I imagined him dead, or imprisoned, or living under some other name in some other country. I never imagined him writing letters, trying to find me. "He never stopped looking for you," I tell him. "Every letter mentions you, asks about you, hopes for some sign that you're still alive and that you remember him." Stefan reaches into his jacket pocket and pulls out a pen and a small piece of paper. "I'm going to write him a letter," he says. "A real letter this time, from his real brother. Will you make sure it reaches him before he arrives?" I nod, and Stefan begins to write. His handwriting is different from what I've been imitating, more angular, less careful, marked by years of living under pressure. But the words he writes are unmistakably authentic. "Dear Milo, I received word that you're coming home. I want you to know that I never stopped loving you, never stopped missing you, never stopped hoping that someday we would find each other again. Meet me on June 17th at sunset at the Roman Theatre. Come alone, and we will talk like brothers should talk, without fear, without secrets, without the years of separation standing between us. Your brother, Stefan." He folds the letter and hands it to me. "Can you get this to Toronto in time?" "I'll find a way," I promise. And as I take the letter and prepare to leave the cafe, I realize that I have finally found the ending to my story. Not the ending I expected, not the ending I planned, but the ending that was always meant to be. The correspondence between Milo and Stefan will continue, but it will be their correspondence now, their story, their reunion. My role as impersonator, as fictional brother, as intermediary between past and present, is finally complete. The letter reaches Milo in Toronto 3 days before his departure. I know this because I process his response when it arrives at the Plovdiv sorting facility. It's addressed to Stefan Petrov at Postbox 247, and it contains just 4 words. I'll be there. M. But there's also something else in the envelope. A second sheet of paper, folded separately, with my name written on it in Milo's careful script. For Christo Georgiev, postal censor. I don't know who you are, but I know you exist. Stefan's letter was written in a different hand than the others I've received over these months. The Stefan who has been writing to me knows things about my life in Toronto that my real brother could never know. The Stefan who has been my correspondent understands my loneliness in ways that suggest he shares it. I'm grateful for what you've done, whoever you are. The letters you wrote gave me back my brother before I knew he was lost. They gave me a reason to hope, a reason to return home, a reason to believe that love can survive separation and secrecy and time. I don't know why you chose to help rather than simply destroy my letters, but I want you to know that your kindness changed my life. Thank you for becoming Stefan when Stefan couldn't be reached. Thank you for writing back when silence would have been safer. Thank you for caring about the story of 2 brothers when you had every reason to remain indifferent. I hope we meet someday, so I can express my gratitude in person. Until then, know that you have given me the greatest gift imaginable, the gift of family restored. With profound appreciation, Milo Vasilev. I read the letter twice, then lock it in my desk drawer, along with the copies of all the other letters I wrote and received during my months as Stefan. They are my secret archive now, my private collection of a story that was never quite true, but which became true through the telling. The next few days pass in a strange state of suspension. I continue my work at the censorship office, processing the usual assortment of international correspondence, stamping letters, approved or destroyed, making my entries in the official ledger. But everything feels different now, charged with the knowledge that my months of deception are about to resolve themselves in a meeting between 2 real brothers at the Roman theater. Viktor Petrov notices my distraction. You seem preoccupied lately, Christo, he says during our weekly staff meeting. Is everything all right? Are there any security concerns I should know about? Nothing specific, I reply, though my voice sounds strained even to my own ears. Just the usual challenges of evaluating potential risks in foreign correspondence. He nods, but I can see him making a mental note. In our system, even emotional distraction can be interpreted as a sign of divided loyalties, of connections that might compromise professional judgment. On the afternoon of June 17th, instead of going home after work, I walk to the Roman theater. I don't plan to interfere, don't plan to reveal myself, don't plan to intrude on their reunion in any way. I simply want to see the ending of the story I helped create. The theater sits on the hillside overlooking the city, its ancient stones warm in the late afternoon sun. Tourists wander among the ruins, taking photographs and consulting guidebooks that explain the history of Roman Plovdiv. Children play hide-and-seek among the columns, while their parents sit on the stone benches and watch the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. From a distance, hidden among the tourists and evening strollers, I watch as a man in a dark coat approaches the central area of the theater. Even after 15 years, I recognize Milo immediately, older, grayer, wearing clothes that mark him as someone who has lived abroad, but unmistakably the young man who once dared me to climb the Ottoman clock tower. He stands alone for several minutes, looking around nervously, checking his watch, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I remember from our school days. Then another man approaches from the opposite direction, walking with the careful deliberation of someone who has learned to move through the world without attracting attention. Stefan. I watch as the 2 brothers recognize each other across the years and the distance and the political circumstances that have kept them apart. There's a moment of hesitation, of uncertainty, as if neither can quite believe that this reunion is really happening. Then Milo steps forward, and Stefan steps forward, and they embrace with the fierce intensity of people who have been holding their breath for 15 years. They talk for more than an hour, their voices carrying across the ancient stones, but their words lost in the distance. I see Stefan showing Milo something, probably the pocket watch, returned to its rightful owner. I see Milo pulling photographs from his coat pocket, images of his life in Toronto that he wants to share with the brother he thought he'd lost forever. As the sun sets behind the hills of Plovdiv, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflect off the ancient walls of the theater, I see them walking away together, still talking, still catching up on 15 years of separation, still marveling at the miracle of finding each other again. And as I watch them disappear into the evening crowds, I think about the letters I wrote, the voice I borrowed, the fiction I created that somehow became truth. I think about the power of words to connect people across distance and time, about the importance of stories that bring families together instead of keeping them apart. Six months later, I receive one final letter addressed to Stefan Petrov at Postbox 247. It's from Milo, but this time it's not a letter seeking connection or expressing longing or bridging distance. It's a thank you note. Dear friend, it reads, I don't know who you are or why you helped bring Stefan and me together, but I know that someone did. The handwriting in the letters I received was not quite Stefan's, the voice was not quite his, but the love was real, and the bridge you built between us made our reunion possible. Stefan told me about the postal worker who chose to deliver a message instead of destroying it, who chose to facilitate reunion instead of preventing it. I hope this letter finds that person, whoever they are, and I hope they know that their kindness changed 2 lives forever. Stefan and I are corresponding regularly now, with our own voices, in our own words. He has decided to apply for permission to visit me in Toronto, and I am hopeful that such permission will be granted. We are brothers again, really and truly, and we have you to thank for that. I don't expect a response to this letter. I simply wanted to say thank you, to acknowledge the gift you gave us, to let you know that your story, whatever it was, however it began, has a happy ending. With gratitude, Milo Vasilev. I read the letter twice, then place it carefully in the drawer with all the others. My secret archive has grown over the months, not just the correspondence with Milo, but other letters I've saved, other stories I've encountered in my work as a censor. The love letter from a Bulgarian girl in Paris to her fiancé in Varna that I allowed through despite its political criticisms. The birthday card from a grandfather in Munich to his grandson in Burgas that contained forbidden photographs, but such obvious love that I couldn't bring myself to confiscate them. Each of these documents represents a choice, a moment when I decided that human connection was more important than bureaucratic procedure, that love was worth the risk of professional consequences. The political climate is changing, slowly but perceptibly. There are rumors of reforms, of loosened restrictions on travel and correspondence, of a gradual thaw in the rigid systems that have governed our lives for so many years. Some of my colleagues speak cautiously about the possibility of early retirement, of new opportunities, of lives that might include choices beyond simply following orders. But for now, I remain at my desk in the windowless office, processing letters and packages and postcards from around the world. The difference is that I now understand my role not as a guardian of state security, but as a curator of human stories. I look for opportunities to facilitate rather than prevent, to connect rather than separate, to choose love over fear whenever the choice presents itself. The radio plays its evening programming, and outside my window, Plovdiv settles into another night of ordinary dreams and ordinary hopes. But for me, it will never be quite ordinary again, because I have learned that letters can change lives, that fiction can become truth, and that love, once written, can find its way across any distance, through any obstacle, to the heart that needs it most. Last week, I saw Stefan and Milo together at the cafe on Tsar Boris Street. They were sitting at a corner table drinking coffee and talking quietly, looking like brothers who had never been separated at all. Stefan looked different, more relaxed, more present, as if reclaiming his real name had also allowed him to reclaim parts of himself that had been hidden for years. They didn't see me watching from across the street, and I didn't approach them. Their story belongs to them now, and my role in it is complete. But seeing them together, seeing the easy familiarity that had survived 15 years of separation, gave me a satisfaction deeper than any professional accomplishment I've ever achieved, because I realized that in helping them find each other, I had also found something essential about myself. I had discovered that even in a system designed to keep people apart, there are opportunities to bring them together. Even in a job that requires suspicion and separation, there are moments when trust and connection are possible. Even in a life that often feels meaningless and mechanical, there are chances to participate in something that truly matters.
You've been listening to The Sleeping Archive. Sleep well. History will wait.